My name is Jack Thompson. I'm 37 years old, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio with my wife Lisa and our two kids, Emily, 4, and Jake, 6. We've been married for nearly 10 years, and from the outside, we seemed like the perfect family. Weekend trips to the park, family dinners, summer vacations by the beach, the classic American family life. But in early 2003, I started noticing small, unsettling things. At first, I brushed them off, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, life with two small kids can be chaotic. But some things just didn't add up. My kids, especially Jake, had started talking a lot about spending time at their grandparents' house. This wouldn't be strange under normal circumstances, but Lisa's parents lived 90 minutes away. Yet, according to the kids, they were going there 2 or 3 times a week. Essentially, every day Lisa wasn't working her part-time job. That struck me as odd. One evening, as I sat down to pay the bills, I overheard Emily telling her brother about how Grandma had baked them cookies and Grandpa had shown Jake how to hammer nails into a piece of wood in the backyard. My eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a one-time visit. These trips were becoming a regular part of their lives. That night, as I sat in my small home office, my mind racing with questions, my eyes caught a small, yellow sticky note on the side of my desk. It was in Lisa's familiar looping handwriting, all password, redacted. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I should trust her, right? She's my wife. But that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let go. Slowly, I reached for the keyboard, typed in the password, took a deep breath, and hit enter. What I found hit me like a punch to the gut. In her sent folder were emails to an old college friend, casually discussing how she had been regularly meeting up with one of her high school ex-boyfriends. They joked about how the guy's wife had let herself go after having kids, and Lisa even mocked the woman for gaining weight. My hands began to shake. This wasn't just a harmless fling. This was a full-blown affair, planned and executed like some twisted fantasy. I printed out every one of those emails, carefully stashed them in the locked drawer in my home office, and tried to catch my breath. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy the perfect little fantasy she had built. This wasn't just going to be a confrontation. It was going to be a calculated, cold-blooded revenge, the kind you'd never forget. It was a cool spring evening in 2004 when I first realized just how deep my wife's betrayal ran. I had just gotten home from work, and the house was unusually quiet. Lisa had taken the kids to her parents' house again, or so she said. The eerie silence of the empty house only amplified my suspicions. My mind raced back to the countless times my kids had mentioned spending time at their grandparents' house, baking cookies with Grandma, learning how to hammer nails with Grandpa. It all felt like a carefully constructed lie. As I sat down at my desk in the small, cluttered home office, my eyes landed on a yellow sticky note stuck to the edge of the computer monitor. In Lisa's neat, rounded handwriting, it read, "Old password, redacted." I felt my heart quicken. Should I do this? Should I invade her privacy? She's my wife. I should trust her. But that gnawing feeling in my gut refused to go away. Slowly, I typed in the password, my hands trembling slightly as I hit enter. The old AOL connection tone filled the room, and the inbox loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, as if the computer itself was hesitant to reveal the truth. At first glance, her inbox seemed innocent enough: emails from family, work reminders, forwarded jokes from friends. But when I clicked into the sent folder, my stomach dropped. There, in plain text, were a series of emails between Lisa and an old college friend. I clicked on the first one, my heart pounding in my ears. Lisa had been meeting up with one of her high school ex-boyfriends. They had lunch together regularly, followed by a few hours in cheap motel rooms. She even joked about how his wife had let herself go after having kids, mocking the woman's weight gain. She's a shadow of who she used to be. Lisa had written, my hands tightened into fists. This wasn't just a fling. This was a full-blown affair, planned, calculated, and carried out without a hint of remorse. I printed every email, making sure to date and timestamp each one. I carefully placed the stack of papers in a locked drawer in my office, taking a deep breath as I closed the drawer. This was just the beginning. I was no longer just a suspicious husband. I was a man on a mission to destroy the perfect little lie my wife had built around herself. That night, as I sat alone in my office, I made a silent promise. She was going to pay for this. I would tear down every last piece of the life she had so carefully constructed brick by lying brick. The emails I had found were a start, but I knew they weren't enough. If I wanted to tear Lisa's world apart, I needed more than just a few digital whispers. I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof, the kind of evidence that could shatter her carefully constructed reality and leave her with no way to wriggle out of the truth. I started by piecing together her schedule. I knew Lisa worked part-time at a small boutique 3 days a week. That left 2 weekdays completely unaccounted for. According to the kids, those were the days she supposedly spent at her parents' house, 90 minutes away. But I wasn't buying it. The mileage on her car had been steadily climbing, far more than simple trips to Grandma's house could explain. I needed professional help. Confronting her with just a few printed emails would only give her the chance to twist the narrative, to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity. I needed something she couldn't deny, something that would hit her like a freight train. So I reached out to Ron, an old friend from college who had spent a decade as a detective before leaving the force to become a private investigator. Ron had a reputation for being thorough, relentless, and a bit of a bulldog when it came to his cases. Exactly the kind of ally I needed. I met Ron at his cramped, smoky office in the back of a rundown strip mall. The place smelled like stale coffee and cheap cigarettes, and the walls were covered with framed newspaper clippings of Ron's biggest cases. He leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking under his weight, and listened as I laid out the situation. I handed him the stack of printed emails. "I need to know everything," I said, my voice steady but my hands trembling. "Where she goes, who she's with, how long she's gone. I want every dirty little detail." Ron flipped through the emails, his eyes narrowing. He tossed the stack onto his cluttered desk and gave me a grim nod. "I'll find out what she's been up to," he said, his voice rough from years of chain smoking. "You're not going to like it, though." A week later, Ron called me back to his office. As I walked in, he slid a thick manila folder across the desk. "Sit down," he said, his tone more serious than I had ever heard before. "You're going to want to be sitting down for this." I took a seat, my pulse pounding in my ears. I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. Inside were dozens of photographs, timestamp notes, and detailed reports. Ron had followed Lisa for a week, tracking her every move. She had been driving the kids to her parents' house, dropping them off, and then meeting her lover, Bob, for lunch. After their meals, they'd check into a cheap, no-name motel on the outskirts of town, the kind that rented rooms by the hour and had flickering neon signs in the parking lot. The kind of place where people go to do things they don't want the world to see. The photos showed them laughing over lunch, their heads bent close together, her hand resting on his arm. Another set of photos showed them walking into the motel together, her head on his shoulder. As they disappeared through the rusting metal door, my fists clenched as I flipped through the evidence. There were time-stamped logs of her movements, lists of dates, and even a record of the cash withdrawals she had made to cover their little rendezvous. She was living a double life, using our children as a convenient alibi and lying to my face every single day. "This is all the proof I need," I said, my voice low and controlled. "But I want more. I want to know everything about this guy." Ron leaned back in his chair, exhaled a cloud of smoke, and cracked a rare, thin smile. "I had a feeling you'd say that," he said. "Give me a few more days." I left his office that day feeling a strange mix of rage, betrayal, and anticipation. I wasn't just going to divorce Lisa. I was going to burn her perfect little world to the ground. I went home, poured myself a stiff drink, and locked the folder in my desk. The final pieces of my plan were falling into place. I was done being the oblivious, trusting husband. The storm was coming, and Lisa had no idea just how devastating it would be. When I left Ron's office that day, the manila folder clutched tightly in my hand. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, the kind of calm that comes just before a storm. I had the proof The photos, the timestamps, the motel records, all neatly organized and ready to destroy the life Lisa had so carefully constructed. But I wasn't ready to strike just yet. I wanted to hit her where it would hurt the most: her pride, her comfort, her sense of control. I spent the next few days going through Ron's notes, reading every detail of Lisa's affair. I learned their routines, their secret meeting spots, and even the excuses she used to cover her tracks. It was like watching a twisted soap opera play out in real life. The lies she had fed me, the carefully constructed web of deceit, it all made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay patient. Rushing this would only give her a chance to slip through my fingers. I booked an appointment with a divorce attorney, Mark Reynolds, a no-nonsense, shark-like lawyer with a reputation for winning brutal divorce cases. His office was in a sleek, glass-walled high-rise downtown, a far cry from Ron's smoky, cramped den. I walked into his office, the thick folder tucked under my arm, and felt a strange mix of anger, determination, and a deep, cold satisfaction. Mark leaned back in his leather chair, adjusting his cufflinks as I laid out the situation. I placed the folder on his polished mahogany desk and slid it toward him. He opened it, flipped through the photos and notes, his expression hardening as he took in the evidence. "You've got her dead to rights," he said, looking up at me over the rim of his glasses. "Adultery doesn't carry the same weight in divorce court as it used to, but with this much evidence, you're in a strong position. We can take her for everything." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in weeks. "That's exactly what I want," I said, my voice steady. "I want full custody of my kids, the house, and I want her to walk away with nothing but the clothes on her back." Mark leaned forward, tapping the edge of the folder. "This is a good start, but if you want to really bury her, we need to know more about this guy she's been seeing." I had been waiting for this moment. "I've already got someone on it," I replied, thinking of Ron and the thin smile he'd given me before I left his office. "I'll have more for you soon." A few days later, Ron called me back to his smoky little office. I walked in, the bell above the door jingling as I stepped over the worn threshold. Ron leaned back in his chair, his feet up on the cluttered desk, a fresh cigarette smoldering between his fingers. "You're going to like this," he said, nodding toward another thick manila folder sitting on his desk. I dug a little deeper, just like you asked. I took a seat, my heart pounding in anticipation. I reached for the folder, but Ron held up a hand. "Before you open that, let me give you the highlights," he said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Your wife's boyfriend, his name is Bob. He's married, has 3 kids, and here's the kicker: he works as a VP of sales for his father-in-law's company." I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through my veins. This was better than I had hoped. Bob wasn't just some random guy. He was a man with a lot to lose. I opened the folder and started flipping through the pages. There were photos of Bob and Lisa laughing over drinks, slipping into cheap motels, even sitting close together at a restaurant that Lisa had once dragged me to on our anniversary. My teeth clenched as I realized how deeply my life had been intertwined with this betrayal. Ron leaned forward, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Here's the best part," he said, tapping a thick stack of papers in the folder. I pulled his financials. "The guy is living well beyond his means. Big mortgage, car payments, private school tuition for his kids. If this affair blows up, it's not just his marriage that's going to fall apart. It's his entire life." I felt the corners of my mouth curl into a slow, grim smile. This was exactly what I needed: leverage. Not just over Lisa, but over Bob as well. If I was going to burn Lisa's world to the ground, I might as well take her lover down with her. I met with Mark again a few days later, handing him the updated file on Bob. He scanned through it, nodding in approval. "This changes everything," he said, closing the folder with a satisfied thump. "We can use this to pressure her into a quick settlement. She won't want this getting out." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the icy calm of a man in control. "Make it hurt," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Make her regret every lie, every betrayal." Mark smiled, a shark's grin, all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, I intend to," he said. "By the time I'm done, she'll wish she had never even heard of the word affair." As I left his office that day, I felt lighter, almost relieved. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the right moment to spring it. I chose a cold, gray morning in January to set my plan into motion. I wanted the weather to match the tone of the day, cold, unfeeling, merciless. I woke up early, went through my usual morning routine, and kissed my kids goodbye as they left for school. Lisa gave me a peck on the cheek before heading out the door, completely unaware that her life was about to implode. I had already coordinated with Mark, my divorce attorney, to have the papers served at Lisa's workplace. I wanted to hit her where she felt the most secure, where her fake smile and carefully curated image of the perfect suburban wife couldn't save her. I wanted her coworkers to see the cracks in her facade, to watch as her world crumbled around her. At precisely 10 a.m., a uniformed process server walked into the boutique where Lisa worked. I had chosen this time carefully, late enough in the morning that the shop would be busy, but early enough that she would still have to endure the entire workday with the weight of the papers in her hand. According to Mark's assistant, who had been positioned across the street to observe, Lisa's face went pale as the server approached her. He handed her the thick stack of papers, and she froze, her hands trembling as she flipped through the documents. Her coworkers looked on in confusion, some even whispering to each other as Lisa's mask began to crack. I could almost picture her, clutching the papers with shaking hands, her mind racing as the reality of her situation set in. I had included everything: the photos, the emails, the motel records, even the private investigator's detailed logs. There was no denying it, no talking her way out of this. She had been caught, and everyone around her was about to find out, but I wasn't done. If I was going to destroy Lisa, I might as well burn her entire support structure to the ground. That meant Bob had to go down too. I had asked Ron to handle this part. He was more than happy to oblige. That afternoon, Ron drove to Bob's house, a large brick colonial in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. He parked his car down the street, adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror, and walked up to the front door with a second manila folder under his arm. When Bob's wife, Karen, opened the door, Ron introduced himself politely, handed her the folder, and said, "You need to see this." According to Ron, Karen's face shifted from confusion to shock as she flipped through the pages. Photos of her husband, arm in arm with Lisa, slipping into cheap motels, laughing over drinks, and even the notes Ron had gathered about the cash withdrawals Bob had made to cover their affairs. Ron said she went silent for a moment, her hands tightening around the papers, her knuckles turning white. Then, without another word, she turned and slammed the door in his face. Ron chuckled as he told me the story later, lighting a cigarette as he leaned back in his creaking office chair. "She looked like she was about to explode," he said, blowing a thin stream of smoke into the air. "I'd say Bob's about to have a very, very bad day." The results were almost immediate. Within hours, Karen had emptied their joint bank accounts, packed up her kids, and moved in with her parents. She cut Bob off completely, refusing to take his calls, blocking his number, and even changing the locks on the house. When Bob's father-in-law found out about the affair, he fired Bob from his position as VP of sales at the family business. Without a job, without a home, and with his reputation in ruins, Bob's life collapsed in spectacular fashion. But it didn't end there. A few days later, Bob made the mistake of trying to confront Karen at the house. Neighbors reported hearing shouting, glass breaking, and the sound of a physical struggle. Karen's brother, who had been staying with her for protection, came outside and beat Bob so badly he ended up with a broken nose and a pair of cracked ribs. The police were called, and Bob spent the night in jail, his mugshot splashed across local news sites the next morning. Restraining orders were filed, court battles ensued, and the once proud VP was reduced to a jobless, homeless pariah. Last I heard, Bob had left the state, trying to start over in a place where no one knew his name. Good luck with that, Bob. As for Lisa, she moved out shortly after being served, taking only a few boxes of clothes and personal items. I had one full custody of the kids, the house, and a significant chunk of our joint savings. She ended up in a small one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, a far cry from the comfortable suburban life she had once enjoyed. The kids adapted quickly, their young minds more resilient than I'd expected. They didn't seem to miss their mother all that much, and I made sure to keep their lives as normal and stable as possible. I even hired a therapist to help them process the sudden change, determined not to let my own childhood trauma repeat itself. I watched as the dust settled, the chaos slowly fading into a new, quieter normal. And as I poured myself a glass of bourbon one night, sitting in my dimly lit office, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of closure. I hadn't just ended my marriage. I had destroyed the lives of everyone who had conspired against me. I took a slow sip, savoring the burn, and allowed myself a small, bitter smile. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. And I had delivered it with surgical precision. When the storm finally passed, I found myself standing in the ruins of a life I had once cherished. The house felt quieter, the air heavier, but it was mine, truly mine, for the first time in years. The echoes of betrayal still lingered in the walls, but the weight of uncertainty was gone. I had cut the cancer out, and now it was time to rebuild. The first few weeks after the divorce were surreal. I had full custody of Emily and Jake, and the house was finally free of Lisa's lingering presence. I had removed every trace of her, boxed up her clothes, stripped the bedroom of her things, and even replaced the family photos that once lined the hallway. It was as if I was erasing her from my life, one frame at a time. I threw myself into my role as a single father, making sure the kids felt safe and loved despite the chaos that had consumed our family. I enrolled them in new after school activities, signed them up for soccer and dance classes, and made a point to spend more time with them on the weekends. I wanted to be the father I never had, present, supportive, and unbreakable. I also hired a child psychologist, someone who could help them process the sudden, violent change in their lives. I didn't want them growing up with the same scars I had, the same distrust and bitterness. I made a promise to myself that I would break the cycle. With Lisa out of my life, I found myself rediscovering the man I had been before our marriage, confident, driven, and unapologetically free. I started hitting the gym again, reconnected with old friends, and even began dating for the first time in over a decade. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be sitting across from a woman at a restaurant, making small talk and laughing over a glass of wine. But it also felt good, like a part of me that had been buried for years was finally coming back to life. I also took up old hobbies I had abandoned during my marriage, woodworking, hiking, playing the guitar. I wanted to reclaim every part of myself that Lisa had slowly eroded over the years. I even took a few weekend trips with the kids, camping in the mountains, visiting the beach, exploring new cities. I was determined to create new, happy memories for them to replace the painful ones that might still linger in their young minds.